Hello, everyone. It's me, Sarah Goodall from Tribal Impact. Welcome to another one of our regular LinkedIn live sessions. I've realised actually in the previous ones, I've never explained why we do these. The premise behind this is really speaking to industry leaders, practitioners, professionals in the space of activating employees on social. And we look at all different angles and flavors of that. So thank you for joining us today, whether you're listening to us on the podcast or watching us live on LinkedIn. Hello, welcome, and say hello in the comments if you're with us live. Today, we are joined by a good friend of mine who I've known for many years, Kirsten from SAP. And we were just chatting before about when we last spoke, didn't we, Kirsten? Because I actually thought I was wearing the same top. So I thought I was going to have a bit of
I didn't check. I hope I'm not.
It's been 2 years since we've done it. But I'm not wearing that. Yeah, we do look different. So that's quite good. I wouldn't want everyone to think I have to wear this top when I speak to Kirsten. So welcome, Kirsten. Do you want to give... I think there's going to be a lot of laughter in this session. I'm sorry, guys, but we are talking today about creating learning experiences that drive digital behavior changes. So, and I am so excited for this conversation because this is a very hot topic at the moment. Organizations, enablement, and in fact, today, LinkedIn has just launched the Building the Agile Future, the Workplace Learning Report, which I've just shared on my LinkedIn. If anybody wants to go and have a look at it, really interesting about the investment in learning and development and why it's so important right now. But before we go into that, Kirsten, do you want to give us a bit of an introduction, who you are, where you are, what you do, please?
Sure. My name is Kirsten Boileau. I am in Waterloo, Ontario, Canada, so about an hour and a half west of Toronto. And I have been with SAP for almost 17 years now. It'll be 17 years in June. And I have spent, for the first 8 years, I was in, an area of marketing called business development. And then I moved into a role where I was leading our global social selling program. And that's how Sarah and I met. She was doing social business here on the European side, and I was starting to build out that program on the Americas side. And I led our global social selling program for about 7 years. A couple of years ago, I passed it off and focused more on functional learning for marketing, and was building our digital marketing learning programs. And then a year ago today, I moved into SAP Learning's organization, and I'm focused more on leadership learning in this role.
Super. So the reason I think it's brilliant for you to be on this call is you've had a lot of experience training and enabling sales teams, global teams, geographically spread. We've had a lot of questions around scaling that in preparation for this today. So I want to touch on all of these topics and just get some of your experience from that, Kirsten. But before we do that, why do you think it's important to invest in digital skills and digital cultures in companies?
Well, I mean, we've seen from what's happened over the last few years that we had to move to a digital environment. We had to step back from, having those face-to-face conversations and move into those virtual conversations. So that was one aspect of it. But I think on a bigger, more strategic scale, our customers, our clients, our prospects are consumers, and they're consumers of digital behaviors or digital activities, digital everything in their own personal lives. And because they are consumers, they also expect that to transfer over to their business lives. They expect that same experience. And so we as, providers of digital business, we need to be able to provide that same experience for them, provide that same level of technology, that same level of digital engagement for our customers. And so that's why it's so important for companies to invest in that digital culture.
Mm. Do you know, I've just started reading a book called Jolt, which is all about, sales training methodologies, and it mentioned that this morning actually when I was at the gym, and it talked about digital. People expect it. They
Hmm.
expect the way they consume content in their home lives. The binge content, the way the digital behavior. And this Gartner research, McKinsey research shows that so many people are just absorbing that content without actually having face-to-face meetings with salespeople. They're a lot further along that decision-making process now when it comes to sales specifically.
Hmm. Hmm.
They're gathering their own evidence and content and making their own minds up and things. So, yeah. So, oh, hello, Sandy. Welcome. God, Kirsten.
I know that 8 or 9 years ago we were talking about 70% of the, the decision making had been already completed by the time a customer wanted to talk to us, and I would think it's got to be further along now. That was a long time ago,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
people are even have access to even more digital experiences before they get to or want to have that conversation with a sales rep.
yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So going back to some practical examples, and Sandy, yes, it might have been you that told me about the Jolt effect. That's probably why I started reading it. So credit to you. um, what uh, what examples? You've obviously created learning experiences for different types of audiences:
Hmm.
sales,
Hmm.
marketing, and now most recently leadership learning experiences. Can you can you tell me a bit more about what that looks like practically?
There are differences, but there are also a lot of similarities. So, when it comes to salespeople and even marketing, it has to be quick. But I think that also applies to leadership as well, because they are leaders don't have a whole lot of time to invest in learning. And so having those micro doses of learning, and even learning incorporated into different processes that they're doing, into workflows, that's something that I've read a lot about recently, is incorporating learning into a workflow. I think that makes a lot of sense when you're talking about people that don't have a whole lot of time to invest in learning, or they don't necessarily see the value, because there are people out there who still don't necessarily see the value, and they're questioning, how is this going to apply to my day to day? How valuable is this? What's in it for me? The WIFM, of course, right?
Mm,
And so if you can embed it into the workflow, it makes it a lot easier for people to see that value immediately, see how it actually impacts their day to day. So microdosing is, when it comes to snippets of learning, is something that's one of the modalities that makes sense. Um, and but again, they also need to be able to apply it immediately. Um, and whether that's in a kind of um, a peer-to-peer group where they're doing some role play, or it's in they have a need, they do their learning, and they apply it immediately. So that is something that also, one thing I found that worked really well with sales reps was that if I could bring in something that they were working on that day or that week, whether it was, they were trying to get in touch with a certain client, and hadn't been able to get on their radar yet, by using, when we were talking about social selling particularly, by using the social selling methodologies and the tools and the mindset, we were, by the end of that session, or maybe even by the end of, like, within a couple of hours, we were able to see the impact that using those methodologies was having on them, and they had an answer, or they had a response from the client, right? And having that immediate impact on their actual day-to-day work was huge, to be able to see them drive that behavior change. um,
mm,
Marketers really needed it. They, if they weren't able to apply it immediately, they were a little bit more forward thinking, in that I know that we're not doing this, investing in this yet, just yet, or it hasn't become sort of part of our current processes, but I need to prepare to be able to apply it in the near future. um, Whereas sales reps, it needed to be right now, like right now.
yeah, like now in this session. Come
Yes,
on,
yes.
Kirsten, get me that meeting by the end of today.
Yes, yes. But where,
Yeah.
and marketers were they were a little bit more forward thinking in that, it might be 2 or 3 months down the road, or I need to prepare to be able to take on my next role in when it comes to for this technology or this kind of methodology to be useful.
What about leaders then? What's that? Have you got any
They're a bit of a
practical?
mix of both. I mean, often it came down to over the last year, it's come down to, I have this need or I'm running into this issue with, my leaders. What do I, what learning is going to change the behavior, or what do I need to do differently? And so they would be able to take that learning and apply it. And but it wouldn't be quite as immediate as, that day. It might be, the next time they had the one-on-one with that leader, or the next time they were preparing for a virtual offsite with their leaders, and they wanted to learn how to um, foster communication or do something along those lines.
Mm. So this is really interesting. So a couple of things I'm going to play back. So microdosing. I've heard of micro learning, micro e-learning, that sort of thing. But I love the micro dosing, kind of little short
I
bits.
borrowed that from the pharmaceutical industry, I think.
Yeah, microdosing. Love that with the knowledge. Incorporating into existing workflows. That is very interesting. What journey are they on already? And how can you weave learning into that rather than
Yes. Yeah.
let's take you out of that workflow for the day, drop you into a different process, and that's probably why a lot of learning doesn't stick, right? Because they get
I think so, because it's not part of what they do on a day-to-day basis.
That's interesting. Right, I'm going to come back to that one. And the other one is applying it, and how different people apply it at different levels. But for a salesperson, they need to feel it working
Hmm.
immediately
Hmm.
to embed that. Is that correct? Is that what
I
you
would,
were?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, if they don't see the immediate effect, the immediate impact on, because they are so numbers driven, so performance driven,
Mm,
that if they don't see that immediate impact on their performance, it's not worth their time to invest in,
mm. It's quite
in
interesting.
their view, anyway.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think what you're touching on here is what's motivating the audiences, and
Hmm.
really
Hmm.
coming at it from that perspective and tapping into that. Um,
Absolutely, yeah.
Actually, just while we're on that, then, so I am going to touch on this as well, because something that's going on in my head before I move on to some of my other questions. And anybody who's watching, pop your questions in, because I'm really curious about learning, development, how it works, how you scale it. So pop them in if you want to. Um, Personalization of learning experiences. I don't know if you've got any
Mm-hmm.
views on this. It's something I've been looking at, like mass personalization, but you see enablement tools specifically for sales,
Yeah.
where you've got learning paths, you can drop them in, individuals at the right stage of their maturity. This stuff fascinates me. I don't know if you've got any views about that, opinions.
I
um,
haven't had a whole lot of experience with it here at SAP, because we haven't had the tools available to do that real, deeply personalized learning. However, I do find that it works well is when you build out, if when you're not talking about one specific topic and you're talking about a broad set of skills, say digital marketing, um, then you can do like a self-assessment and a management assessment, and compare those two, and then determine exactly where the focus of learning needs to be, and then that becomes personalized. The learning itself isn't necessarily, doesn't wake up and say, hello, Kirsten, here's your learning for today. But it is based on, what you really know and where your gaps are. So that
mm,
no one person necessarily has the same exact learning journey, because they don't have the same gaps and they don't have the same strengths.
yeah,
That's where I've had a lot of experience in that way, doing the assessments first to really understand where the strengths are, where the gaps are, and then building out the learning pathways based on those gaps.
I love that. Yeah, I think, and I think from a sales point of view, I mean, we come across this quite a bit actually. When you're looking at, not every salesperson is in terms of their maturity as a social seller, they're different. They're at
Oh, very
different
much so.
stages of their maturity journey. I would almost overlay another thing on there, which is confidence level as well. You know,
Oh, yes.
there's the
You're still
gap analysis.
encountering that, eh?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. You know, there's definitely that. You know, there's the it's not just the gap, it's the confidence, and there's the maturity level, the gap that they need to get to, and then there's the, can I do this, so so there's a lot of that that still needs to
Yeah,
happen, but
yeah. I
yeah.
remember, early on when we were doing, somebody said to me, "Well, what if I go what if I say something wrong and it goes viral?"
Yeah.
And so there is a lot of that, fear when it comes to digital. There's a lot of yeah, you're right, absolutely skill gaps and just varying levels of confidence. My husband, love him to pieces, but he has no interest whatsoever in, digital social, mechanisms of
No.
any sort. He prefers pen and paper over anything else. Um, and well,
Mr.
my
Antisocial, that's what I call my husband.
and then there's me, right? And I'm, digital everything. Um, and yeah, I guess it's true that opposites attract, right?
Yeah.
Um, but there, he would be, if I was trying to teach someone like him with that sort of personality, you have to hold their hand. And that's where I feel like there's a real opportunity for embracing and perhaps challenging those that are more comfortable, those that have a higher skill set when it comes to digital, perhaps those digital natives. They can come alongside those who are perhaps a little more fearful, a little less confident, and act as a coach. A peer-to-peer learning is one of the big things that makes such a huge difference, and that's actually one of the ways that you can scale as well.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
is by leveraging those who either have tried this out for themselves and been successful, um, or that just seem to get it almost immediately as soon as you share that information with them. And then I've always leveraged them to say, hey, why don't you be kind of the cheerleader or the ambassador in your team, and challenge the rest of them, and be that kind of point of contact for any issues that they're encountering and that kind of thing.
right. So can you tell me a little bit more about that actually? Because that was going to be my next question about scaling. So you've talked about peer to peer, connecting, the more skilled digital employees with the ones that are coming up the curve. But how do you do that? Because I mean, SAP is known for building this trainer network internally, especially when it comes to sales enablement. And I had a
Mhm,
question from a
mhm.
customer just last week about this as well. It's like, well, who puts their hand up for that? Do they put their hand up? Are they told to do that? What, because they're a volunteer network. Can you just give us a how you scale it? So, and what's a trainer versus a champion or an ambassador or what does that look like technically?
Yeah, so there's a lot of elements to it. When we very first started out, um, the first group of trainers that we trained way back in 2015, they were appointed to be trainers.
Okay.
Um, and what I found was that, sure, they were all there and enthusiastic when we did the training, the trainer training, but it was from a long-term perspective, it was not successful.
Okay.
They Because they were appointed, they didn't have the passion, they didn't have the interest, they didn't have the dedication needed to be a trainer, to want to take on more, to want to get better at being a trainer, because being a trainer is not necessarily easy.
Mm,
It takes a certain type of personality, a certain type of skill set to be a good trainer, and to have that impact. And so once we realized that appointment of trainers was not a good model, we started going through an application process. But in order to get that application process going or to get people to apply, um, we really created this sense of excitement, this sense of, real, what's the word for it? Excitement is a great word for it, but it also like, big impact on the company. We were, sharing our story from, every rooftop that would that we could, so that people were like, I want to be a part of that. I want to see, I want to be part of that transformation. I can see how, and we did that through storytelling. Um, so it wasn't all about the numbers. It was, these are the numbers, but here's how we got there. Here's how, people actually did this. Here's how they made an impact. Here's how they really, were so successful. And people were like, I want to be part of that. I find, that at the time, digital was just starting to become something really, exciting here at SAP. And so it was a, combination of things, but, right timing was one of them, that, we told the right stories in the right places and got people excited and passionate about wanting to be trainers. And then we put them through the application process. And if they were there just because, they were told to be there, it was completely different, reaction. And when you got people that really wanted to be there, that really wanted to improve their skills or build that skill set, they were open to that coaching that they needed. There was, at one point there was someone who, um, read the slides and didn't really engage with the audience. And, once I told her it was okay to breathe,
Yeah.
and to inject her own storytelling into, what she was talking about, it made a huge difference. But she was open to that. Whereas some people,
Okay.
if they're only there because their manager told them to be there, they're not necessarily open to that kind of coaching.
Yeah.
So trainers are very, very critical to the process in that they are the ones with the expert knowledge. They are the ones who can troubleshoot. They are the ones who have the big connection to the bigger, project team or program team within the company. The ambassadors are slightly different in that they don't have a vested interest other than they want to see their colleagues succeed. They want to see their team succeed. Um, and they probably are more likely, leaders in their team, right? The
Yeah.
leaders without authority within their team.
Yep.
And they're there just because they don't necessarily have the time to, become trainers themselves, or don't necessarily want to be a trainer themselves. They don't like necessarily standing up in front of a huge crowd or anything like that, but
Hmm.
they're good on one-on-one. They're good at coaching. And they like building relationships with people, and because relationships is one of the biggest things. I mean, it's good for relationships are what we need to do and build from a sales perspective with our customers. But in order to be effective as trainers and coaches and ambassadors, you also need to build relationships with the people that you're training.
So I've got this is really interesting actually because you've sort of separated those two out, what a trainer is and what an ambassador is. And you're right, an ambassador is probably someone who's successful in their role, but just like you say, wants to see others succeed. So they're a good
Hmm.
example. They're doing this right. Share your successes. How did you get there? That kind of thing. But the trainers, that fascinates me. How you managed to tell the right stories in the right places, that you got enough volunteers that wanted to be part of this, because it's voluntarily done,
It
isn't
was
it? It's
all
not.
volunteers. Yeah, we had
Yeah.
250, close to 300 trainers at one point. Yeah.
Wow. And did you, for those that watch a global organization, did you sort of make sure that you covered all geos and stuff? Did
Hmm.
you, make sure you had global coverage, that you didn't have any gaps? Is that?
Yeah, yeah. And I think, once we got going, once we built a group of about 50 trainers, there was that many more stories being told, that many more training sessions happening, and it just, exponentially grew. Um, but there was also a demand coming in for that training from the sales leadership, right? They were like,
Okay.
we're seeing this have an impact. We're seeing that this is, very, um, it's going to drive our business forward, and so we need to invest in this. And then we would have to try and make the right match. Is there
Yeah.
someone that's fairly close by that could do it, where they could just drive into the office, or do we have to negotiate travel and that kind of thing? So
Mm, mm.
we never charged for the training from from an actual learning perspective, but we did, they had to support travel if it was needed. And so we actually we tried to make sure that we had trainers in all of our regions. So there was
Mm.
at least 10 or 15 people in every region that was able to support training.
That's amazing. I think that's a huge success. And also, can I just say, in this report that I mentioned earlier from LinkedIn that's out today, it talks about internal mobility and how that boosts retention and builds workforce skills. There's a statistic here that at the 2 year mark, an employee who has made an internal move has a greater chance of staying with their company. And it talks a lot about what motivates people to grow within a company and learning and giving them an opportunity for career growth. And I think this is what you're touching on here, because one thing you keep saying here is these people have expert knowledge, they have a passion for the topic. And yeah, you are looking for, the people in the right regions that also can train. It's quite a, once you whittle that down, you're not going to get too many people. But if you
Hmm.
can
Hmm.
tell the right story and sell it to them in the right way, that this is a learning opportunity, a growth opportunity, then you don't need dedicated trainers for this. This can be somebody's part-time hobby project that they just love
Yeah,
doing.
yeah.
Um,
We only asked our trainers to commit to once a quarter.
okay.
Um, and it might be um, 2, maybe 3 days, depending on travel, out of the office once a
Okay.
quarter, where they were
Yeah.
focused on this. And generally, their managers were in favor of that, right? Because again, it was an opportunity for them to grow their skills, to grow their network, to have a true impact on the business, because we were tracking it through revenue and that kind of thing, and pipeline. And so by them participating and growing their own brand in that way, people were really really motivated to participate, and they were always so sad when if they had to give it up because they moved on to a new role, or they left the company or something like that. They were always very very unhappy to leave, because it was such an exciting project to be part of.
Yeah. I'm going to ask one more question before I move on to how you sell this to a leadership team. But how do you keep that group of trainers motivated? Did you have like a community of them? Did
Hmm.
you get them together regularly? Did you give them some branded swag? What was the did you get
Yeah,
them
I
all
should have worn
together?
my sweater.
Yeah.
Yeah, we definitely had branded swag that we sent to everyone, and we gave out. I believe we gave out T-shirts and lanyards and that kind of thing as when they graduated from the Train the Trainer program. We also, when we built the ambassadors program, we did the same thing for them. But then we also, once a month, we would have a social selling community call,
Mm,
and we would bring in people. We would talk about the various business aspects um, of the program, but then it was kind of an open time for Q&A, an open time for sharing stories, an open time for asking questions about, you know hey, I'm hearing this all the time. I don't know how to answer it. What do how would everybody else kind of address this question, that kind of thing. So we had a lot of sharing back and forth of that. um, Unfortunately, as I was kind of as the pandemic was starting to ramp up, I was hoping that we would be able to get all of the trainers together in one place, um,
oh,
to do a kind of a big recognition and thank you for all of their hard work over the years. But of course, that just never happened, and it's too long
yeah.
ago now. But
Yeah, what a shame. No, I love that. And I think that's often an overlooked part, actually. I think people, expect so much, but you actually do have to invest in that program. You
Hmm.
can't just let
Oh,
it run.
absolutely. People need to
It's
feel that they're appreciated, that their efforts are having impact. And I think we would often ask our trainers to share stories of, success stories from the trainings that they'd done, whether because what happens is when you've trained a group for a day or two, or depending on how, it was structured, um, you build relationships with those people and they know you as the expert. And so then when something great happens, they come back to you like, hey, guess what? I did what you said, and this is what happened. And I'm so excited. And I was able to make my number or whatever it was, you know,
yeah,
and then we would use that. We also had um, a kind of an all hands type call that we, for everyone who was interested in social selling, we regularly had about 2,000 people on that call, and then we held it on a bi-monthly, so every other month basis, and we would gather up those stories and we would share them, and in front of lots of sales executives, and LinkedIn would join us to talk about what was new from a tools perspective, and then we would it was. So we had a lot. We tried to really drive a lot of community and sharing of best practices through those two different things. One was very closely and close knit for the trainers themselves. One was much bigger for the entire community of people that were participating in this topic. So.
yeah. Do you know the word that keeps coming back is about storytelling, stories,
Mhm.
sharing stories,
Mhm.
capturing stories, sharing stories, and also impact, tying it back to impact. That's relevant for the person that you're building learning experiences for. Like in salespeople, it's their
Mhm.
revenue impact, their pipeline impact. For leaders, it might be to do with attracting talent, retaining talent. Employee engagement, whatever the numbers are that they care about.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
There's a lot to do with you have to, when it comes to building experiences that drive behavior change, you have to make it relevant and you have to make it interesting and engaging. Um, they need to see that this is something that will be impactful for the long term and not just the short term for them, because they're
Mm.
not going to take the time to learn it if it's just going to be a short term impact. If it's going to be a long term impact, then they're more likely to take that time. But also, you know, it needs to be exciting and interesting. Learning just in general, right? It can't be just reading off a slide, or can't be just a whole bunch of facts thrown at someone. uh, I try to, when I actually deliver the training, I try to make it very conversational, and before I give them the answer, I might ask them what they think the answer might be, and then give them the answer. Um, and then talk about the why of that answer. The why is something that's so important to people. Why do I need to invest in this? Why is it important? Why is it going to help me? Why, it always comes back to why. I have to start with why. Um,
Oh,
book on my
yes.
bookshelf.
Oh,
Um,
yes. Another good
it's
book. It's turning into like a
yes,
book club today, isn't it? We've got the jolt effect and yeah.
yeah. Start with why is just, it's something that really hits home to me, and hit home to me when I read the book a couple of years ago, that people aren't going to invest, no matter whether it's in anything, unless they understand the why.
Yeah. Yeah. And their why is going to be different depending on their role, but
Hmm.
also different
Absolutely.
depending on their maturity level, right? Because if
Hmm.
I'm sitting there thinking there's an executive who's very, who's got a great network and is on LinkedIn and maybe just liking a few posts and commenting on a few posts, and I say to them, you need to start creating your own content here. You can't just keep piggybacking off other people. Everybody else expects to hear your thoughts and your leadership. Why, so that their why is going to be different to someone who's just starting out on social. And
Absolutely. Yeah.
um
Yeah. And I remember, speaking of people that starting out, I remember working with the sales academy here at SAP, and they're like, well, I don't really know anybody, or I don't really know a whole lot. I'm like, well, start with what you do know. That this particular topic is important. So do some research and form some opinions from that research, and talk about that.
mm,
Um, uh, don't don't be afraid. I mean, I was in the same situation 10 years ago, uh, 10, 11 years ago now, 11 years ago.
Good loose. Well, there's 2 years with the pandemic that we just can write off that, that we were
Yeah,
back
I
then.
know.
Yeah.
It's that, I was really trying to embrace the whole concept of social selling, and I didn't know anything about it. Um, I had come back from a maternity leave. I'd been on off for 16 months, and because of the twins, and and I was like, well, I know nothing about social media, but somebody's asking me to do stuff with social media, so I better figure it out. And I just spent the time really kind of trying to learn everything I could, listening to the gurus out there, and and then taking, but not just in absorbing that information, but taking that information and thinking about how I would apply it in my own situation.
Yeah.
Um, and I think, that's how I've really tried to be successful throughout all of the conversations that I've ever had with leaders who want to invest, or perhaps objecting to investing in trading, is thinking about, okay, if I was in this situation, so understanding, you have to first understand their situation, and then taking the time to evaluate that, and then think about how would I take what I know about this topic and apply it to what they're doing on a day-to-day, and apply it to the challenges that they're experiencing. Can I alleviate some of the challenges they're experiencing with this new behavior?
Mm,
Um, and I think if you can tell that story, for when it comes to objection handling, with leadership, because I think that was one of the next topics we were going to talk about,
yeah.
um, is being able to tell that story and being able to address those challenges um, with this new behavior change, that will go a long way to convincing them that this is something to invest in.
Yeah, and that that is where a lot of this sort of falls down. Really, is you can't convince leaders, you can't communicate the business case. What can you just expand? That's maybe one of the challenges, but what are other challenges that you faced, Kirsten, on this, you know,
Well,
journey?
yeah, when it comes to social selling training, back 9, 10 years ago, we built it as like a day-long workshop. Actually, I think, in fact, it was 2 days when we first built it, and that was a lot of time to ask a sales leader to take their team out of their day-to-day.
Yeah.
Um, and we really focused on. Um, I think we focused on too much at the time.
Hmm.
um, so I think when it comes to um, convincing leaders that this is important, one is to tell the right story, but two is to reassure them that you're going to make that time that they're taking out of their day to day not only valuable but impactful, in that you're going to use to go back to something we talked about earlier, you're going to use something that they're doing on a day to day basis, and actually see impact in that session,
Hmm.
right? So that they don't feel like it's not losing work time. They're
Yeah.
gaining a skill, but also at the same time, um, still building out their business.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Moving their pipeline along or
yeah,
whatever it is. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mm.
And I think, to your question about, convincing leadership, the storytelling is one of the biggest things that you can do. And I know that at the very beginning, when you're trying to convince people to try and invest in something like this, um, you don't have any internal stories
Mm.
to share. And so you're relying on external success stories. And that can be really difficult. But it's also worthwhile, I would suggest, to ask around. So some of those people we talked about earlier they're more mature in that space. They have a lot of experience just because they have taken the time to invest in it for themselves. Those ones that we might identify as ambassadors, to
Mhm.
talk to them and to see if they've got any stories to share that aren't necessarily official, stories of your training and your impact, but because it's not about your training, it is about the impact that's going to have on the business, right? That's where if you can get that story across to the leaders, your training will ultimately support that impact to the business, but it's not about your training, it's about the impact of the business. That's where I would focus any kind of storytelling.
This is brilliant. Yeah, not about the training, but about the impact to the business. And I love that idea. Actually, it's hard to find stories, so look at who's already active internally, interview them, share their story, and then the case becomes, what if we could do this at scale? What if we could do this for more people?
Yeah.
And then the conversation is maybe moves into some kind of pilot. Where you can get enough data and work so closely with the team that you can actually get some evidence that it does
Hmm.
work,
Hmm.
that backs up the storytelling, and then you can move into scalar. That's a typical sort of process that we would follow, actually, which is
Absolutely.
that
Yeah.
sort of pilot up to scalar and pilot, and then you into optimization. So that's really. What about measuring impact and success? I'm conscious of time. I could talk to you all day, actually, Kirsten, about this stuff. I
I know.
love this. I love this. What
We have
about?
to catch up more often.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
Okay.
not leave it for 2 years. Yeah. So, but what about measuring? How do you measure learning experiences? What metrics do you look at?
Um, well, we always used surveys at the end of the training session to
Yeah.
measure impact. And one of the things was, did you find today's session valuable? Would you recommend it to someone else? But then also asking the question of, um, are you going to apply what you learned today?
Okay.
And give them that scale of, yes, I'm 100% going to apply to zero to nope, I didn't find it valuable at all, right? And so anywhere in between there. So that gives you an understanding of how applicable is your training, right?
Yeah, that's good.
And to know that the experience itself was good enough that they feel like they can replicate it, because that's one of the big issues is when they do it in your training session, they've got all these supports around them. Can they replicate it? Is it simple enough to replicate outside without that support? Um, and then we always so that was from the actual training itself and the learning experience itself. When it comes to changing digital behaviors, we built out a 2-month activation program where we would appoint an ambassador within the organization, within the team. So that's why we leverage those ambassadors so much. And we would have them, and in some cases it may have been someone official, like a marketing rep that was working directly with the team, and they would be responsible for making sure these things happen. But things like, we would give them a little task every day, and it might be connect with someone new on LinkedIn. It might be share a post, reshare a post on LinkedIn. It might be create your own post. It might be look at 3 new profiles today on LinkedIn, because we use LinkedIn as such that was our main tool, or is our main tool. That those were the things those were the little habits we tried to build, and knowing that it takes, I think research says it takes something like 30 days to build a habit. We extended that
Yeah.
and really I made it 60 days, and it meant that someone was kind of measuring that behavior change on a consistent basis, making sure that those things happened, um, tracking, because people would take a screenshot or they'd send in their spreadsheet at the end of the day. These are the new people I connected with. These are the new meetings I made, or whatever it might be, and had them build those behaviors on an ongoing basis, because I knew that I knew fairly on, or realized fairly early on, that once they left the training session, they went back to their desk and did things the same old way they'd done them all the way, all
Mhm.
the time,
Yeah.
because it wasn't a habit yet.
Yeah.
And there was the odd few where, and these are the ambassadors, where they'd be like so excited, and they just really gravitated towards it, and they would change their behavior themselves. But those that, you know, um, either weren't as excited, or didn't feel as comfortable with it, they needed that support to make that. They weren't necessarily opposed to it. They needed that support to make it a behavior change.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I remember I had one guy in a training session, and he was like this.
Oh, I've had some of those as well. Yes, I know.
But this is where it's so important to build the right learning experience and make sure that your learning experience is as impactful, as relevant, as engaging as possible, because he went from this, rolling
Yeah.
his eyes at me, to came to me at the end of that session. I think it was by lunchtime, actually. He said, I have never seen a training like this, and I am so invested in making this change. I'm like, okay.
Isn't that lovely? That's just what you need, isn't it? Do you know, I had exactly the same. It was a few years back now, but I've had exactly the same experience. And he sat in the corner of the room, and I thought, oh, this is going to be really tricky and very
And they
painful.
tell you, throw all kinds of objections your way, right?
Oh yeah, in front of everyone. And
Yeah.
but do you know what? I love that because I do love a challenge and stuff. And
Yeah.
I also like to learn of any new objections that maybe we hadn't come across before. But the chap in question, he became one of our best ambassadors internally at this
Same.
customer. And it's amazing, isn't it? And you just think, yeah, yeah, if we can help you, we can we can help others. Um, and in the spirit of book club, because we've mentioned so many amazing books today, and you talk about habits, I've just finished Atomic Habits, which is a brilliant book
Oh, I'll have to try
about
that one out.
habit building and habit stacking and things like that. So if you've not read that, have a look at that one as well, because that's
Hmm.
good. But we're doing some really cool stuff actually with a customer around exactly that, around their advocacy program and embedding social habits into their daily lives over
Yeah.
a 66-day program, I think it is, or something like that. So it's so cool. Um, I'm going to add one extra thing to that, which is data, because we love data, and inspired by
Yes.
you and data at SAP. One customer that worked with us, they looked at the cohort that went through the pilot, and they looked at those that came to the training. They correlated that with SSI data. Then they
Hmm.
correlated that with sales performance data. And you could see, and they actually overlaid employee advocacy tool data as well. So they could see that the top social sellers, who were also happened to be the top salespeople, were the ones that attended all the training and 6 months later were driving great results. But also we're using the advocacy tool to share content as well. So you could overlay all those data sets and come up with some really clever stuff around
I love
identifying.
seeing that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
We did a
it was
lot of
good.
that at SAP too. And it was so, excuse me, so interesting to see that those that had really taken the time to invest in that learning, but then not only in the learning, but also in the behavior change. And by, taking the long-term approach, and, social selling, as we've talked about before, is not a sprint, it is a marathon.
Yeah,
um, there are the occasional things that you'll see happen immediately, but for the most part, it really is a marathon, because you have to build that brand, you have to build that reputation out there before you can actually see a whole lot of um, impact. But at the same time, you would see that data come through where the people that were investing that time, investing that energy in the changing their habits and changing their behaviors really had the most success.
yeah,
And we loved to tell those stories.
yeah.
Absolutely.
There you
Then
go.
taking that data and turning it into stories, that's where people get excited.
Yeah, yeah. And that's what you need to do. And it just happens in lots of different stages. Kirsten, I'm going to have to stop now because it's like 10 to. I can't believe normally we finished this like 10 minutes ago. And I could
Oh,
just
really?
honestly, I could carry on talking to you forever. And I still didn't get through all my questions, but I did do quite well, Ryan. So I did manage to ask most of them. Um, Pleasure as always, Kirsten.
Oh,
It's
thank you
really
so much,
cool.
Sarah. We appreciate it.
You have so much amazing experience to share around this, honestly, and you're so generous in sharing it with everyone else. So thank you for taking the time to be with us today. And if anyone's got any questions, I assume they can find you on LinkedIn, connect with you.
Oh, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
that'd be fabulous. So
My name is
just
is right there.
yeah, there you go, all spelled
I
out,
think I'm the only
ready.
one.
Yeah, are you? I'm going to test that now. But yeah, thank you so much. And thanks for everyone for tuning in and for listening onto the podcast after. I know we get a lot of listeners. Really, oh, there's Ryan. What's he said? Joining everyone. Oh, yes, next week we're talking about bringing employee stories to life. So in the spirit of storytelling, and which you've mentioned throughout this entire chat, Kirsten, that's going to be a brilliant one. So thank you so
Wonderful.
much. All right.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. We'll see you next week. Take care.
Bye.